Amen. Well, it's been a busy week here at Canvas, like this building. One of the beautiful things about leasing this space here in the Presidio, besides it being like in the Presidio, one of the best parts of the city, I think, is that we can open up our doors not just for our community on Sunday, but we can actually open our doors to the community every day. And because of this, it allows us to be a part of some really, really cool events that happen in San Francisco all throughout the year. And one of my favorite events that has now happened a couple years is called the Masters of Scale Summit. And they rent the Presidio Theater, they rent our space, and for an entire week, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people fill both buildings. They're founders, they're investors, they're people on the leading edge of technology and biology research and health and mental health and nonprofits, like people doing incredible work. Like we had Brene Brown hanging out at Canvas this week. That's kind of crazy, right? She was awesome. And so one of the cool things about this event is they generously let me and Jenna participate and sit and attend the conference. The unfortunate thing is that by Jenna and me participating, we bring down the collective IQ a few points. And I'm not just being self-deprecating. It's just like these people are so brilliant, doing such incredible work in the world. And I leave so inspired each and every time the Masters of Scale Summit comes through. But this year was unique because their vision for this conference this week really moved me. It really spoke to me. When I went over to Presidio Theater for the first session, I saw in big letters on the stage their vision for this week's Masters of Scale, and I took a picture of it, and it is the future we build. The future we build. I walked in there. This was not like a Christian event, and yet the vision for the entire week had such strong theological, and I would argue also anthropological underpinnings to it. The future that we build. See, what this conference seems to understand, and what I hope you will understand as well, is that you are created to create. I believe you are imagined to imagine. The scriptures tell us that you were created in the image of God, and God is the ultimate creative. He created the cosmos. He created the land. He created the sea. He created the animals that swim in the sea, the animals that walk on the land. He created the raw material that gives us the world that we live in and enjoy today, and He also created you. And Scripture says that you are created in the image of God, which means this. It's huge if you'll believe it. It'll change everything about how you see yourself and how you live your life. That what it means when it says you were created in the image of God is it means that you were created to be like God and to mirror God's character in the world, which means this: if God is creative, so are you. And when you were a kid, you believed that. All of us as kids, we believed that we were creative. But somewhere along the way, we bought into the lie that there are those who are creative and then there is everybody else. And chances are most of us in this room would put ourselves in the everybody else category and look to others as the creative. But I want to hopefully disrupt that paradigm and invite you into an entirely new way of viewing yourself, this world, and your purpose within it. You are created to create. In fact, one thing that makes you distinct from every other species on the planet is that you are created to create not just anything, but I believe humans are created to create the future. And humans are created to create the future. Ants create colonies and bees create honey, but what do humans create? We create the future. And we see this in the micro, right? When two people come together and a baby is born, new life, a future is created. So we see this unique, innate ability to create the future in the micro, but also in the macro. Through technology and innovation, we create culture. We create technology. We push the human story forward. Why? Because that is a fundamental part of what it means to be human. You are created to create. And see, I think this conference understands something that we understand deeply but oftentimes forget. And that is that if you stop creating the future, you're living beneath what it means to be fully human. And whether you believe in God or not, I actually think we agree on this. That if you stop creating the future at a minimum or worse, you actually destroy the future from being created. We actually have a word for a person who does that. That word is inhumane. That when a person stops the future from being created, or they destroy the future from being created in the life of somebody else, we look at that and we say that is inhuman. That when we stop creating the future, we live beneath what it means to be fully human and fully alive. So I love this statement, the future we build, because it speaks to why we're here, to create the future, but it also has an assumption. And the assumption is that you're going to create a future whether you want to or not. The question is not whether you will create a future. The question is, what kind of future will you create? And is it a future worth creating? And even more, is it a future worth fighting for and passing on to the next generation? I don't know about you, but I wish there were more people thinking this way in our world in this current historical moment, thinking about what kind of future will we create and what kind of world will we pass on to the next generation. And I believe that we as followers of Jesus, we should be on the front lines of culture, the front lines of the human story, ready to create and write the next best chapter so that we can pass it on to the next generation. And so today I want to talk about that. In fact, for the next few weeks I want to talk about this. And what does it look like for you to live up to your calling as a creative? What does it look like for you to begin to form the world around you? In fact, this series is called Formed to Form. For those who don't know, we've been, for the entire year of 2025, been asking the question as a church, how can we be more intentional in our spiritual formation? How do we become more like Christ? Because that won't happen accidentally. There's never been and never will be an accidental saint, right? Like, if you want to become like Christ, it will only happen when you live intentionally into the rhythms and ethics and teachings of Jesus. And so this year we've been echoing the prayer in Isaiah that Israel prayed, where they said, God, you are the potter and we are the clay. We are in your hands. Yeah, that's been our prayer this year. Because I don't know about you, my life tends to get off track when I turn that around. When I think that I'm the potter and God's the clay. Right? Like when I try to do that, my life doesn't go very well. But when I finally get to the point to do what we just sang about and say, God, I'm the clay. I really don't control much of anything at all. You're the potter. So I'm going to place myself in your hands. That's what we've been doing this year because we want to be formed. But you should know that your spiritual formation is not just for your own formation, it is also for the formation of the world. That you are formed not just for formation's sake, but you are formed to go and form. We are not just called to be with Christ and like Christ, but we are also called to do what Christ did. And Jesus gave his life for the future of the world. And I believe he's calling us all to do the same. And anything less is a life beneath what it means to be fully human. And so today, what I hope to do, what I really believe and hope that God will do through me, is begin to maybe change your perspective on your work. Perspective on what you do each and every day, and help you begin to see that your work is sacred, your job is sacred, and that all of us actually have been given the same raw material to build a future with. And my hope today is we'll leave here with this sort of, courage or motivation to not just consume culture, but to create it. To not just consume the raw material that God gives us, but to actually use it to create something beautiful and true. And by the way, all of this is in the Bible. Like this idea that you were created to create, you were imagined to imagine, that to be a human means to create a future worth passing on to the next generation. This is actually very biblically grounded. If you go to Genesis chapter 1, the very first chapter in the very first book of the Bible, we are given something that theologians have called the cultural mandate. It's this mandate given by God to Adam and Eve that I believe is also just as much a mandate for us today as well. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 says this, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern." Now, I'll unpack that in a moment, what that actually means, but then in Genesis 2:15, the author of Genesis continues and says, "The Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it." Now let's talk about that last verse first, because some of us, I think, when we imagine this moment where God placed Adam and Eve in the garden, he's like tend over it, that we imagine like the world is complete, the garden is finished, and God put Adam and Eve in there with like a lawnmower and a shovel, and God's like, just keep it looking nice. Don't let the weeds get out of control. But that is actually not the picture that the author of Genesis is giving us. When you go back to the original language, you don't get this sense that the world is finished. You actually get this sense that the world is just beginning. That God has actually placed Adam and Eve in this sort of unfinished story, this unfinished world, and that he's given them the raw materials of creation. And when he places them in the garden, he's inviting them to co-create with them, to create a future, to create a world, to push the story forward. Which is why in Genesis 1:28, the cultural mandate is to fill the earth and govern it. In other words, what God is saying is create a future. Create a world. Move the story forward. Now, if you fast forward to the end of the Bible, the very last book, you get this book called the Book of Revelation. Who here has read the Book of Revelation? Or tried to read the Book of Revelation, right? It reads sort of like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings had a baby, and you have the Book of Revelation, right? It's kind of a trippy book, but in this book, you get this picture, this glimpse of the disciple John getting a glimpse of the world to come, the future, and the restored heaven and earth. And this is what John writes. He says this: the nations, meaning the whole world, will walk in its light, meaning God's light, and the kings of the world will enter the city in all their glory. And it goes on to say the glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. Now, I don't know a lot about heaven. I haven't been there. And I get a little bit nervous when theologians or pastors talk so authoritatively about heaven, even though they've never been there as well. Because as a result of some of this conjecture on heaven, we have some strange imagery that has come up. Like, when we go to heaven, we're going to go in the clouds. We're going to have our own personal private cloud. And then there's going to be baby angels with harps playing in heaven. And I remember I was raised in the church even one time. I was a follower of Jesus at this church, and the pastor there was trying to convert me, trying to make the sale, right? And their pitch was this. They were like, you need to follow Jesus because after you die, then you'll go to heaven. I'm like, well, what is heaven like? And they're like, oh, it's like a never-ending church service. And I was like, that sounds like hell to me, not heaven. Hey, we got to work on our elevator pitch a little bit there. But what we get here in Revelation with John, and many theologians agree, is what John is describing is that the best of human culture, right? Art and science and music and innovation and technology, it's not being erased in the new heaven and earth, but it's actually being redeemed. It's being carried into God's eternal city. And then in Revelation 22, verse 3, it says, no longer will there be a curse upon anything. Doesn't that sound nice? No longer will there be a curse upon anything, for the throne of God and of the Lamb, meaning Jesus, will be there, and his servants will worship him. Now, maybe this is where my youth pastor is trying to convince me heaven will be a never-ending church service. Maybe this is where they got that from. But when you double-click the word worship, you actually learn something else is being described. Not that we're going to a church service for all eternity, singing nonstop, but that word worship is this Greek word latrio. Everyone say latrio. Latrio. And it doesn't mean to just sing, but it actually means to serve. It's not this passive word, like we're just standing there and things are happening. It's actually this really active word. It's describing work as worship. And so here's the picture. That work was given in the garden as something sacred. But in the end, work is not done away with. It will actually continue without the curse in the city. Which means this. If work is a part of Genesis and it is a part of Revelation, if it is a part of the garden and the city, then this tells us what God thinks about work, and that is that work is sacred. Which means you don't have to wait until heaven to treat your work as sacred. Your work can, in fact, I would hope you understand today, it must become sacred if we're going to create a future worth passing on to the next generation. That every time we treat our work as the sacred responsibility as it is, we have the opportunity to bring a glimpse of heaven to earth. We become the taste test spoons of the future to those living in the present. And we give them a glimpse of what heaven looks like when we treat our work as sacred. So today and every day, just like Adam and Eve, God is putting the raw materials of creation in front of you. Problems to solve, people to love, opportunities to create. And when you only consume those materials, I would argue you are holding creation back. But when you pick up those materials that God has put in front of you and you work them and you make something beautiful with them, you begin to nudge creation forward. You push the story of heaven forward just a little bit more. See, I think the story of Adam and Eve, and it's so important we understand this, sometimes we read it detached, and we say that's a story about Adam and Eve or about some people, but I believe the story of Adam and Eve is not just a story about Adam and Eve. That story is not just a story about some people, it's a story about all people. It's about all of us, that God is inviting us to co-create with Him, to push the world forward. In fact, John Mark Comer, in his book called Garden City, which if you're interested in this topic more, I'd encourage you to read that book. But he says this: the first thing we learn about God is that He's a creator. And if we're made in His image, then we are created to create. Turn to the person next to you and say, you're a creative. You're creative. You're creative. And you may not believe that yet, but my hope is that you'll begin to believe it today, because when you do, that is when you can begin to rise up to the calling that God has on your life. Now, the idea of seeing all your work as sacred, it sounds amazing. I think we all probably would agree, yeah, that would be great. But I doubt many of us view our work as sacred, right? Like, I doubt any of you, when your boss, pings you on Slack and says, what are you doing? I doubt any of you are like, just fulfilling my calling by sending these emails, right? I doubt any of you have ever opened up an Excel spreadsheet, cracked your knuckles, and said, let's advance the kingdom of God, right? None of us have done that, and it's okay. I'm not saying that to shame you. Most of us don't feel like our work is sacred. Most of us just feel like our work is work. And so as a result of that, we spend an exorbitant amount of our lives doing work in order to make a living. And with the little bit of time we have left, we long for work that would help us make a life. But I want to tell you today that you don't have to sacrifice making a life in order to make a living. You can actually do both. And God invites us into that. And I believe when we begin to see our work as sacred, not only is it possible to make a living, but even better, you will begin to make a life. The question is, why do we struggle with this? Why do we struggle to believe that our work is actually sacred? Like some of you already right now in your head, you're already explaining away why your work isn't sacred. Where did that come from? Who told you that? And why do you believe that? See, one place to start, I think, where we kind of see where we got off track a little bit when it comes to vocation, when it comes to work, is around the time of Martin Luther. For centuries leading up to the Reformation, the church had developed this sort of hierarchy. You had the priests, you had the monks, and you had the nuns. And the priests and the monks and the nuns were considered to be people who were called. But if you were a farmer or a craftsman or a merchant, well, you just had a job. So according to this hierarchy in the church, you had those who were called, the priests, monks, and nuns, and then you had everybody else. But I don't believe that's how it was ever meant to be understood. How about you? Like, the word vocation actually comes from the Latin word vocatio, and the word vocation actually means your voice. Your vocation was always meant to be your voice in the world. It was always meant to be your unique contribution to God's ongoing story. And what is so sad is that every single one of us is born with a voice, and so many people die in echo. They die in echo of what somebody else was called to say, instead of ever using their God-given voice to say what they were designed to say. See, Martin Luther, he pushed back hard on this distorted view of vocation and this distorted view of calling. In fact, he believed that all work mattered to God when it was done in faith and love. Martin Luther, he said this, he said, the maid who sweeps her kitchen is doing the will of God just as much as the monk who prays. In other words, there is no divide. Whether you're a manager or designing an app or raising kids or waiting tables or perfecting your latte art or writing code, if it is holy, if it is done with God and for others. I think sometimes pastors are given too much credit. And I say that as a pastor. That oftentimes people will say, Travis, your work is so important. Thank you, I agree. But I would argue that we don't need more pastors. I know that Jesus says the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And oftentimes when I hear that verse quoted, typically what's followed is, we need more pastors and we need more missionaries. But I actually don't think that's what Jesus was talking about. I don't think Jesus was saying the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few, so go be a pastor. I think he was saying that because he was wanting all of us as followers of Jesus to show up each and every day and understand we have a role to play in the story that God is telling. And that God is just looking for people who don't just go on mission trips, but they see every single day as a missions trip. That they wake up and step outside their apartment and they enter into their job wherever they may work and they live their life on mission because they understand their work is sacred. That the work that they do matters. They are pushing the world forward. They are co-creating with God. And see, we need more followers of Jesus on the leading edge of AI, helping shape this future we're entering into right now with strong ethics. We need more followers of Jesus fighting for our environmental future. We need more followers of Jesus working to find cures for diseases. We need more followers of Jesus in music and in fashion and in the film industry. I believe in every sector of society we need followers of Jesus that are not just consuming culture, but they've decided, I'm going to create culture. I'm going to push the story forward. See, the bottom line is that God is asking all of us, not just me, to show up, to take the same raw material that Adam and Eve had and to shape it, just as God wired you to do so. Yeah. See, Paul says something similar in Colossians chapter 3. He says, work willingly at whatever you do, as though you are working for the Lord rather than for people. How differently would you show up to work if you started showing up believing that your work wasn't being done for your boss, but it was being done for Jesus? You might show up on time now. You might hit that deadline a little bit more consistently, and your work might be a little bit more excellent. See what happens when we begin to see our work as sacred, as not trivial or insignificant, but as a fundamental part of how God moves creation forward. And Paul echoes this. He says, man, do everything as if you're doing it for the Lord. What Paul is saying is everything you do is holy when it's done with God and for God. And sure, there's I guess some fine print to that, right? Because we can't drug deal for Jesus. So there's some things that don't qualify. But I don't think that's the majority. I think that's the minority. I think about Adam and Eve. I don't know why I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but it's interesting to me that a lot of times, as a pastor over the years, I've noticed a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about the one tree that God said don't eat from. And they never seem to pay attention to all the other trees that God said you could have. And we're so fixated, but why the one? It's such a Western thing, by the way. We have everything, but why can't I have that? And the reason I bring this up is because God brought Adam and Eve not into a world of scarcity, but into a world of abundance. Sky's the limit. Whatever tree, not that one, but every other tree, is yours. And I think this is connected to how God's plans work, because when I first started going to church, I was really interested in trying to discover God's plan for my life. Has anybody else tried to figure that out? Anybody else still trying to figure that out? Me too. Cool. But I was really struck by sort of the imagery that was given. And the imagery I received, and maybe you've received it, maybe this is how you think it is like God's plan and purposes is like this tight ring, right? So you're like living your faith like this, just like, I don't want to fall, because if I fall, my life is ruined. And that just induces so much stress, does it not? Anxiety, fear, shame, all the things. All the things that I don't think are fruit of the Spirit or what God is inviting you into. See, I don't think that God's plan or purposes for your life is this really, really thin tightrope that you just need to walk ever so carefully, otherwise everything is over. As much as I think, when it comes to God's purposes, the best analogy I could give is like when you were born, God slid a blank piece of paper across the table to you. And he gave you a box of crayons that is just yours. No one else has the colors you have. And when it comes to God's purposes and plans for your life, you're like, what do you want me to draw? I think God is going, what do you want? You're like, yeah, but what colors do you want me to use? What's your favorite color? Start with that. Create something beautiful with the raw materials I've given you. Tell me, which one is more free? The tightrope version of God's purposes or the box of crayons version? I think God has given us a world of abundance. The sky's the limit. Sure, there's a couple trees maybe we shouldn't eat from. But other than that, we can do anything and everything. And when we do work that is good and does good, it pushes the world forward. It pushes the story forward. But see, at the end of the day, you'll never do this if you don't believe in the first place that you have a voice. Like some of us, if you're honest, the internal narrative that you've normalized is everyone else has a voice, but you don't. Everyone else has a purpose, but, maybe I missed my opportunity, or maybe I made one too many mistakes, or maybe I'm just not good enough of a leader to step into that. But friend, I want to disrupt that narrative, tell you graciously and kindly it's wrong, because God has created you for beautiful plans and purposes. One of my favorite verses is Ephesians 2, verse 10. Ephesians 2, verse 10 says this, "For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus." Why? So we can do the good things He planned for us long ago. Isn't that awesome to know that God thought about you before you were even in existence? And God was like, man, I got a box of crayons that's just for them. They're going to kill it. They're going to make something beautiful with this. You see, what we're told here, I guess what we're told here is that people have struggled to believe what I'm talking about for a very long time. Otherwise, why would Paul have to say it? And Paul wanted to remind them, you are God's masterpiece. And I wonder if maybe you need to just leave here today, put that verse on your mirror, on your fridge, and just say it to yourself, I am God's masterpiece. And not like in a narcissistic Kanye sort of way, but in like a holy confidence. Like, I am God's masterpiece. But why? Why? You were created anew so that you could do the good things that He planned for you long ago. My friend, you are God's masterpiece, full of plans and purposes. You have a voice, and the world is better when you speak up. There might be accidental parents, but I don't believe there's ever been an accidental child, because every human being on the planet has been put here by God for a purpose. But believing this is the first step. Believing I have a voice, something to offer, something the world needs, is the first step to stepping into that as a reality. The second question you may be asking then is like, well, how do I find it? Like, that's great. Okay, I believe I have a voice, or at least I'm trying to believe I have a voice in the world. How in the world do I find what my voice is in the world? And this is where I can't help you all that much. There's not a formula. It's sort of frustrating, isn't it? There's not 3 steps that if you do it, at the end, you will find your voice. But what I can do is offer you some questions. Because I don't believe that your calling is something out there waiting for you to arrive. I think your calling is right here within you, just waiting for you to uncover it. Which means you're probably a few questions away from finding your voice. So here's some good ones to get you started. What are you good at? If you're not sure what you're good at, ask the close friends in your life, what am I good at? What is it? When I do it, you just want to give me a round of applause. And that might sound weird to ask that, but ask your friends, what am I really, really good at? But chances are you already know. What work do you do that when you do it for 10 hours, it feels like 10 minutes? What's the work that you do for 10 minutes that feels like 10 hours? That's not your calling. Let's get that off the table. But the calling is not something you have to do. It's something you can't help but do. Right? It's like this thing that's just baked within who you are. Where 10 hours feels like 10 minutes. What are you good at? Your voice is there. What do you care about? What do you care about? What keeps you up at night? What wakes you up in the morning? What causes you to slam your fist on the table? And we all can't care about everything equally, right? But chances are there are some things in you care about more than others do. Where you get angry when you see it happen and you say, somebody should do something about that. And I wonder if God is saying, yeah, you're somebody. And you should do something about that. What makes you mad? What makes you glad? What makes you sad? What is it? Because when you begin to answer those questions, you begin to get within the proximity of your purpose. You begin to get in the proximity of the voice that God has given you. I love how the late Frederick Buechner, he's a poet, author, theologian, he said this. He said, The place God calls you to is the place for your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger. If you can just find that intersection where that thing that lights you up, fires you up, meets a deep need in the world, that is where your voice is to be found. Here's the thing. I think some of us have bought into the lie that if our work doesn't appear significant, then it must not be sacred. So we're like, well, if it's not changing the whole world, then does it really matter? But if it changes one person's world, it does. We bought into the lie that if it's invisible, it must not matter. Or if people don't see the work you're doing, it must not matter. But my friend, you could not be more wrong. You have a voice. Some people's voice will be very loud and public-facing, while others will happen behind the curtain. But both are significant. Both are needed. You have a voice, and the world needs to hear what you have to say. Turn to the person next to you and say, I need to hear you. I need to hear you. I need to hear you. You have a voice. One of the questions that really messed me up when I was first following Jesus is, what is the brokenness in the world that creates a brokenness in you? You're like, I don't know what my voice is. What is the brokenness in the world that creates a brokenness in you? Find the brokenness in the world that creates a brokenness in you, and then go build it back up. Go build something better. We need more Christians who see their lives as a thread that God is weaving into a beautiful tapestry called the human story. I want you to think about something. Everything you will experience today, and have already experienced, from the clothes you're wearing, to the TVs, the sound system, the lights, the food you're going to eat today, everything you experienced at some point did not exist. At some point, someone says, someone should make that. Someone should build that. Someone should create that. And then they had the courage to take the raw material and talent and passion and skills that they have and bring all of that together to bring something that the world didn't have before. And now all of us are benefiting from their courage. What will you create? What story will you tell? What world will you make that the future generation will look back on and say, thank you for making that? Because I believe that is not just a calling that belongs to me or to those with massive platforms or resources or influence. That is a calling that was given to you the moment you took your first breath. Because you were created to create. You Imagine. I'm getting emotional. I don't know fully why. I just feel it in my bones. Like, I don't want you to settle for a life of existence and consumption, because we've seen that and it's played out, and it doesn't create a world that we want. But what the world needs, what I need, and what the people next to you need, is for you to have the courage to create. And the courage to use your God-given voice. And for the courage to push the story of God forward. We're no longer in the garden. We're not yet in the city. Which means the story is still being written. And I believe that God is calling you with this one short life you've been given to move the story into its next best chapter. You pray with me?